Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Wild Rockies Field Institute podcast. I wanted to take some time right here at the beginning just to briefly introduce what this series is. As the name suggests, this is our Alumni Spotlight series where I sit down with some alumni who have gone through our programs in the past and talk about their lives and how they ended up where they are right now. It's just part of the experiment that we are trying out with this new project, and I really hope you enjoy. I had a great time recording this conversation with Brooke, so enjoy, let me know what you think, and I'll see you at the end. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me. This is another one of our WRFI alumni spotlights. Today, I'm joined by a very exciting guest, Brooke Reynolds. Brooke is a alumni, former board member, and just an incredible person working to protect water rights here in Montana, practicing water law in the Ruby Valley. Brooke, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Hi, Matt. Thanks so much. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Would you mind just giving everybody a little bit of introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Brooke Reynolds. I am a water law attorney, as Matt said, based out of the Ruby Valley of Southwest Montana. I live in a really small town. I've been practicing water law for about 4 years now. I started on the path a long time ago. I suppose I got into it simply because of my upbringing. I started out in a farming home. And then I spent a lot of time in Montana. I'm originally from the East Coast, and I just got really interested in the concept of how water works in the Western United States and forged a path from there. So I ended up going to MSU, Montana State University in Bozeman. And then I went to law school at the University of Montana School of Law in Missoula to practice water law. Yeah.
Incredible. Where in the East Coast did you grow up?
So I grew up in Northwest New Jersey. I grew up in a small town. It's called Blairstown. It's right in the Delaware Water Gap area. It's beautiful. My family has lived there for over 100 years. And I loved living there. It was a wonderful place to live. But we spent when I say we, my whole family, my parents and myself, I'm an only child, came to Montana every summer. And so I got really inspired to move out west despite loving where I'm from. And I just knew when I was going to be an adult that I was going to move to Montana.
Oh, that's incredible. Where would you all go when you were a kid?
We would go to the Ruby Valley. So my
Huh.
parents were public school teachers. Both my mom and dad were gym teachers. And so we all had the same breaks. We had every single school break the same. My mom was actually my gym teacher growing up. And so we would basically, the day after school ended, we'd pack up our car with all of our gear. My dad is an avid fly fisherman. And we would come to the Ruby Valley. And it started out, my dad was mentoring students and chaperoning trips through his school out west, out in Montana. And then that kind of ballooned into him becoming a guide. And so we would spend the entire summer in the Ruby Valley where I worked. Well, they worked at a guest ranch and I spent my summers there with them. And yeah, we did a lot of fishing and running around in the mountains. It was great.
That's a good situation to be in as a kid, getting access to such beautiful
Mhm.
land out here. How did that translate into being focused on water rights and water law in the West? Is there a moment you remember from a kid where that interest first really started to take hold on you?
There, I wouldn't say there was a specific moment, but I do have memories of starting to become interested. And I think it comes from a variety of different positions, I suppose you could say. The first thing is my mom's family, where I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up on a farm. So I grew up in the house my mom grew up in. And it was a hog farm when she was growing up. When I was growing up, it was no longer a hog farm. We did some hobby farming for the most part. But when my mom was a kid, that's what they did as a secondary form of income. And so that style of living was very important to me, very rural, do things on your own. and so forth. And I just really loved that style of growing up. I love being kind of out in the middle of nowhere and so forth. And then my dad is a huge outdoorsman. So um, when he was in college, he was a big mountaineer, and he climbed McKinley when I was a baby, and he was a big fly fisherman. And so I just spent a lot of time outdoors, either in the recreational space or in the farming space. And so when I started spending more time out in Montana and really starting to, form my own thoughts and mature a bit, I would hear folks talking about water in a lot of different contexts, for fish, for ranching, drought, for human consumption and health and human safety. And so I just started thinking about it a lot, and that just really forged me down a path where I was like, wow, it's so different in Montana, the use of water, than in New Jersey. When we're in New Jersey, it's not an issue. It never is an issue. But enough rain. I mean, it's a little bit different now, but we always got the rain that we needed. We always had enough water. The way that we treated water was really differently. No one ever talked about it. Whereas out here, it was the main topic, right? And so I around 14 or 15 is when I started really thinking about how can I be involved in this space, because I know kind of both sides of the aisle on it. I'm a huge fly fisherman myself, but then I also support agriculture. And so those tend to butt up against each other a little bit. And I just wanted to become involved. Yeah.
That's incredible. I think it's so rare to have that focus kind of develop at that age and then have the passion and drive to see it through. I think that's really inspiring. That look at you now.
Because my parents have said, like, since I was probably about 15, I've said I was going to become an attorney, and I was specifically going to practice water law in the state of Montana, which they never really understood why. And coming from New Jersey, if I were to tell someone, that I went to high school with or so forth, beyond just my normal friend group, I'm a water rights attorney in Montana, they'd be like, what are you even talking about? So it is kind of funny that it did actually come to fruition, and I stuck with that goal of mine.
Was MSU your number one pick? Was that always the school you were striving for?
No, I actually really struggled with where I was going to go to college. So I went to a private boarding school back in New Jersey. The town I grew up in had a boarding school. So my town was called Blairstown. They had Blair Academy in Blairstown. So I attended Blair and I loved it. But there is a certain path that you are expected to take leaving that type of institution. And so for a while, I was really convinced I wanted to go to a private college, potentially on the East Coast, and follow that course. But at the same time, I knew I wanted to go into some type of environmental career. Probably I want to do water law, I was thinking, but I mean, I was thinking maybe there might be other options. I don't know. And so for a while, I really wanted to go to school in Maine for no good reason. And then I actually did a NOLS course in high school. My dad was a NOLS instructor, and so he told me to do a NOLS course, and I did after my junior year of high school. And I did the classic traditional NOLS course in the Wind River Range and spent a month, away from my parents, away from the guiding context and the guest ranch context that I grew up with of being out west, and was like in a completely different environment and just in a tent for a month. And I loved it. I loved it so much. I thought Wyoming was amazing. And so that really spurred me to think about going to school out west. And to be honest, I decided to go to MSU because I loved Bozeman. Bozeman was the local town for us, big town in Montana. And then also, to be honest, tuition was very reasonable. So I decided to go to Bozeman, and I don't regret it whatsoever. It was a great choice.
That's incredible. I've been at Bozeman only a couple times, and every time I do, it's a very slept on community. I think a lot of the cities we have here in Montana are slept on, but
Yeah.
Bozeman's a cool city.
To go to school. I skied a lot.
When you got to MSU, were you already decided on your major, your path? Was at that point you were like, all right, I'm here, I'm doing it?
Yeah. I mean, I think the funniest thing about me going to MSU was I was an extremely type A individual going to a school full of a lot of outdoorsy type B kids. And so I was shocked. I was coming from a really high stakes environment at
Mhm.
Blair, where a lot of my friends were going to Ivy Leagues and all they cared about was their APs and everything else. And I cared too. And then I went to MSU, and not that the students at MSU don't care. It's a completely different way of living, and just being out West in general is. And so, yeah, I signed up for MSU, and I signed up for my degree, which is environmental studies, and I knew what I was going to do. And then I was going to go to law school, and that was the whole plan. I already knew the tuition and so forth and all of that. So no, I was signed up from the beginning doing environmental studies. And I stuck with it through there. Yeah.
Incredible. At what point during your time at MSU did you first hear about WRFI?
I heard about it, I think, uh, probably my third semester at MSU, because I was in the environmental studies department. And it dovetailed really well into my degree, because my degree was technically a liberal studies degree, which
Mhm.
meant I catered my degree to really however I wanted, and I could choose my course load, decide which path I really want to take within the degree.
Mhm.
And I knew I wanted to go into law. And so the reason why I chose the environmental studies degree was because I knew that ultimately I was going to be going to law school, and my undergrad degree probably wouldn't matter as much as my law degree. And so it didn't really matter which path I took within that. I just decided to take courses that I thought were enjoyable. So I took a lot of like environmental history courses and policy courses and things of that sort. And my advisor, I believe, is the one that told me about WRFI, and that it fit really well within my degree. And she was very similar to me. We have very similar personalities, my advisor and myself. And so she really encouraged me, and I looked into it, and I realized that what is going to be the most incredible experience. So then I made plans to attend, I think, the next year. Yeah.
Oh, incredible. When you were looking at our courses, was Montana Foot in the Float the one that stand out to you right away, or was there a different universe in which you've gone out to the desert instead?
So I looked at the entire course load, and I was intrigued by the Colorado Plateau course, but I am such a lover of Montana, and especially Montana in the fall, that I knew I was going to take Montana Foot in the Float, particularly too because I wanted to practice water law in Montana and go to law school in Montana. And so I really wanted to get that education of running around the state, meeting stakeholders, understanding the issues that are at stake right now or at the time.
Mhm.
And so kind of quickly latched on to Montana Foot in the Float.
Incredible. A little bit of a detour, but I'm interested in hearing, why was Montana such a laser focus for you? I think Montana is interesting, and I have my own reasons for loving the state. But water is such a story for the entire American West. Like, what is it about Montana that really spoke to you?
Such a good question, because I ask myself that sometimes too. I think it's just the fact that I grew up coming here every summer, and I
Hmm.
have really wonderful memories. Because in the grand scheme, it's not that Montana is necessarily that different from some other Western states. I would maybe, in the sense of the way that our laws work and so forth, and the way that people interact with each other, sure, that's different. Every single state is, but I think a lot of it has to do with my memories.
Hmm.
And just, I love Southwest Montana in particular. I think it's gorgeous. I love the sagebrush, and I love the mountains and the sunsets and everything and so forth. But I also really enjoy the people,
Hmm.
and the people that and the fact that you can walk down the street and see someone that very much in every town that I go to. I'll run into a person that I know, and I usually have an epiphany before. I'm like, I'm probably going to see someone I know today, and then I do. And I just love that component. And so for me, I think it was just really an important goal I wanted to leave my town. I wanted to leave New Jersey, and I don't really have a good reason why. I just felt like I owed it to myself to try something different, and Montana ended up becoming the goal. And then I became very comfortable. I think a lot of us get comfortable with Montana because it is a big, small town. And I just knew that it was going to be the place that I would end up.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've noticed since moving here, I've lived all around, and I went to school out in New York and grew up in Colorado, and lived in LA for a while. And there's just something about the community up here in Montana that's unlike anything else I've experienced. It's amazing.
Oh, today I'm going to see someone I know. And it's truly like a little antenna thing. I don't know what it is, but I'll even tell my husband, I'll say, I feel like we're going to see someone we know today. And then we always do.
Oh,
But I never knew who it's going to be. But yeah, I always see someone I know. It's really funny.
I love that. So you're at MSU. You are signed up for this WRFI course. Did you know any people who are going into your course? Did you have any idea what it might be, or what was that kind of experience getting ready for this grand expedition that you were about to go on?
I did not know anyone on my course. From MSU, there was only other one person. I thought there's two of us that were from Montana State, and I didn't know either person. But I did get in touch with, I think it was Gavin, who I attended my course with. I think I got in touch with him maybe beforehand, but otherwise I did not know anyone. I did know, to an extent, some people that took the course the year before. So I did talk to them a little bit too. But me getting prepared for this course was very funny, especially because my roommates, we still talk about it today. There's a joke that goes on between all of my old roommates from college and me, and it's, oh, Brooke was on WRFI. Brooke was on WRFI. And it's like this gap in time where they say all these things, different things happened. Or if I don't remember something, they just say I was on WRFI from when we were in college. And I remember getting ready for this course, and they were like shocked that I was going, I was going to be gone for 3 or 2.5 months. I was like, I'm going to be in the same state as you. I'm not even going to be that far away. But that was, I remember, a really big deal. But I felt very prepared simply because I had done a NOLS course before. And so I felt like I was going to be comfortable in the space. And especially because a NOLS course is truly no phones, no front country whatsoever. You're in the back country the entire time. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be somewhat luxurious. We're going to have a van. We're going to have bins. We're going to have access to food that's not just summer sausage and cheddar cheese. And so I felt pretty prepared. And I think, too, the materials and all the prep work that the folks go through that work for WRFI was great. So I felt very comfortable.
Incredible. Did your course also leave from Missoula back in 2017?
It did, yeah. And I remember when we went, there were terrible wildfires that year. And so Missoula was covered in smoke. And I had only been to Missoula, I think, one other time. And so I remember going in, the WRFI office was on Pine Street at that point. I think it was Pine Street. It was in an old house, very, very cute. And yes, I remember we left from Missoula, and it was kind of funny because when you start, you have to find housing the night before. And so everyone was kind of smattered all over the city, and we're trying to figure out who each person was and so forth.
Take me back to those first couple days if you're on your course. You arrive in Missoula, you're meeting this cohort of people. What was the group dynamic like in those first couple days? How long did it take for you to have these feelings of, oh, I'm going to be with these people for the next 2 months?
So the first night when you go out on a WRFI course for Montanan foot float, it might have changed now, but our first night was sleeping out in the Blackfoot, just outside of Missoula.
Mm-hmm.
I remember us all riding together, and my group was funny. My cohort, we had folks from Vermont, Michigan, Montana, New York, Oregon. So we were from all over the place, Philly. And it was really funny to see us all come together. Because there's obviously some people that are very comfortable in the outdoor space, and maybe some others that this might be a bit of a push for them, a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But I pretty much immediately knew that we were going to, first of all, get along. And second, it was going to be the strangest group of individuals rolling into every single gas station in the state of Montana. And that's truly what happened. everyone was so funny. We had a lot of, in a good way, weirdos, and we would just be weird together. And so it was pretty much within 24 hours, it's like, okay, we're going to all be together and this is going to be a really fun time. It will not be silent very often. And if you talk to any of our instructors from that time, they will say that they could not make us be quiet or focus ever. It was great. I loved it so much. And we had a really big group too. I think there was 12 of us.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so it was a really robust group, and pretty split on, I think, male, female, which doesn't necessarily matter, but I feel like that it was a little bit unusual. And so it was a very interesting dynamic. It was very fun.
Yeah, that is an interesting dynamic. Do you remember who was teaching your courses? Who do you start out with?
So our first were Mel
Mm.
and Dave.
Oh, love Dave.
And then we moved into, Dave left and we got Ryan Marsh.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And I might be off on the timing of this. I know who all attended. It might have been Ryan. If it was not Ryan, we got Nick and also Joe.
Nice.
That was Ryan's first time ever teaching a WRFI course, and I believe Joe's first time ever teaching a WRFI course.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah, it was really fun. It was a good time. Oh, and I want to say it was Erica. Is that her name? We had her only for about a week. She's from maybe Minnesota or something. But we were mostly with Mel. Mel was with us for a long time. And our, what is the term? Teaching assistant was Ben.
I hear that from so many, and I think that's something that has been consistent across WRFI's history is forming these very strange, loud cohorts of odd people and having them gallivant around Montana, which I just love the image of that. And some of the pictures we get from Cycle the Rockies and everyone in their bright, colorful road gear in these small towns in Montana.
You walk in a little dirty or a little punchy. You haven't eaten real delicious food in a while. I mean, you're eating meals that WRFI provides, and those are great. But you're like, I could just use a hamburger, right? And you roll up into I remember we went into this bar in White Sulphur Springs. It's the end of the trip.
Yeah.
Basically, and it has this big sign above. It's still there. I can't remember the name of the bar right now, but it says, got a buck in your truck, get a beer for $1. Yes, let's go in there. And it was just funny to see us rolling into these places, just looking a little bit out of place. Like, what's going on?
I know you had more experience with Montana and the people of Montana prior to that, but was there any part of that interaction that surprised you as you were going around and experiencing more of the state and more of these communities, and then also in this, very particular set of circumstances?
Yeah, everyone was super accepting of us. I mean, really, I didn't notice that. Now that I think back about how we, walk through our spaces together as a group, not that we were inappropriate, not that there was anything untoward, but at the same time, it is quite funny to see a group of 14 a little bit stinky people that have been out in the woods for over a week show up at, say, a bar or something. However, it's Montana. That's not unusual, especially during hunting season. And that's when we were out. Everyone was super kind to us because that's typically how it is in Montana. And a lot of people would ask us, who are we? What are we doing? What brought us to town? And they were usually very interested too in understanding our course load and the topics that we're learning about. A lot of people thought that they were very important topics that we were discussing, especially for the state of Montana. And so I loved going to different places for that reason. People really enjoyed interacting with us.
I think that is the power again, I hear this from so many alumni, and I think it's so true of just that moment of interaction with communities that maybe you wouldn't interact with outside of a course like this. Students who aren't from Montana, who don't interact with rural Montana communities. I think the state gets a bad rap in the national view. We're just kind of seen as a one little state in the middle of the north central US, and that's all a lot of people know about the state of Montana.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the power from a WRFI course comes from making that interaction with communities that maybe you wouldn't interact with outside of that. Is that something that you've found useful in your work now? This, having to go into these communities and engage with them and then talk about these topics.
Yeah, I do. I mean, WRFI taught me so much about how to discuss difficult topics with people that you may not agree with,
Hmm.
and how to do it well and with empathy and have a very compelling conversation. And I do think too that having these conversations in Montana, especially when I did my work course back in 2017, was incredibly important because Montana at the time, it's changing a little bit, but Montana has historically always been a blue and red state, purple state. And so a lot of people have always kind of walked both sides of the aisle on different topics.
Mm-hmm.
They think about things in a very logical way. And so I really appreciated WRFI teaching me both sides of any argument and how to discuss them well with another person in a way that was actually compelling and create a good conversation versus just fighting about different topics. And it's been extremely helpful for me, especially with maybe clientele that I don't always personally agree with or something of that sort. But I am a lawyer at the end of the day. I am required to advocate for my client if I do represent them and so forth. But then also it's really helpful for me just in my day-to-day life. I live in a small town. I have a smattering of different opinions on different topics, and I might agree with the person on one thing and not agree with them on another thing. But it really taught me to consider the person as a whole.
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of people are like, well, I won't talk to that person because of X reason. That's not how I see things anymore. And honestly, a lot of it has to do with WRFI because prior to that, I was black and white. And I would say I'm less so now.
Oh, that's incredible. I think, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, why is Montana special? That's one of my reasons for why thinking our state is special. Because you can talk to anybody on the street, and I don't think anybody here really fits into any normal box when it comes to politics or thoughts on the world and the environment. I think you have a lot of overlap in a lot of areas that other states maybe get a little bit more polarized from. But then also living here a little bit, I've realized that even that thought, I think, is a little misguided. I think people are complex all over the world. And
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. And I think in Montana too, a lot of people are very just aware of what's going on around them in a lot of different contexts and facets of our lives. So, you might have a person that you meet that's very environmentally conscious and that's what their focus is. And then you might meet another person that's less so, but they probably also have a very similar understanding of the world around them in Montana. A lot of people are up to date on conservation issues, right? A lot of people are up to date on no matter where you fall, because it's important to people to enjoy the outdoors in Montana, right? And so, yeah, I think a lot of us can be really short-sighted. And WRFI taught me, and Montana taught me, that a lot of people have different interests that we may not fully recognize, and to consider them. And that there's a lot more to people than we really think. Yeah, they may not be wearing chacos, but they still care. They still care.
when you think about that transition from more black and white thinking to more complex, nuanced thinking, that transformation over a WRFI course, was there a specific thought that you kind of went into the WRFI course holding that was challenged by your experience and you left being like, oh, I'm not thinking about this the right way?
Yeah, so I went through a period when I was in college where I was really struggling with, um, I suppose, the context of farming and ranching and where it was going.
Hmm.
So I've always been interested in agriculture. I've always been a person that feels like agriculture should stay on the land. And then I went through a little period in college where I did not feel that way. And I was like, oh, we have to go back to complete wildlife, all this and so forth. And it was I was trying to think very worldly and think about the health of our earth and then, humans and wildlife and so forth. And I was like, oh, this is the answer.
Hmm.
And then I went on the WRFI course and I realized, I think for me, is that agriculture is one of the best ways, and people can refute me, that's fine. But agriculture is one of the best ways to keep land open, keep land conserved, keep land from being subdivided and turned into housing developments for second and third homes and so forth. And so that really spurred me, that even pushed me, I guess, farther into wanting to become a water lawyer, since most of my clients are farm and ranch clients. And a large component of their livelihood has to do with protecting their water rights.
Hmm.
And also, I think it just made me really think differently about how there's a give and take in pretty much everything that we do. Particularly with conservation. I remember when we went to the Tintina mine, the Black Butte copper mine, that was being proposed at the time. And there was so much conversation about that mine. I remember it was so black and white. It was either it can happen or it can't.
Hmm.
It's either or it's great. And I came out of that conversation and I remember, I think there's a picture of me and I'm holding up the No Black Butte Copper Mine sticker. And I'm also holding up the Black Butte Copper Mine, the Tintina Copper Mine hat.
Huh.
And I have this face on, and it's like, what do I do? I don't know what to think. And I feel like we all, after we left the mine, we all said, well, I don't know what to think. This mine is going to produce X amount of copper potentially and provide X many jobs for people in a very rural community where it's hard to make a living. But at the same time, it could potentially lead to catastrophic effects. We don't know at this point. And we were really, really, I guess, in a pinch, in a bind on what to think about that. And so, yeah, I think that just really spurred me to start thinking differently and start thinking more critically about the world around me and how I approach things.
Hmm.
And I do realize that there is kind of a middle ground for everything, and not everything is right, not everything is wrong.
That's really special. I think I hear that so often from students, that being put into these communities that, again, they may not in their own independent life decide to go engage with. And they, growing up think, oh, I disagree with these people on everything. And then you get to talk to them, you realize we're all people and we agree about a lot more than we might think. And having that process of, even if we disagree about some specific things, I like what you said, like there is a middle ground to most things. Um, and at the root of a lot of these problems, we all care about the people around us. We all care about our families. We all care about, you know, our local communities, and that can manifest in different ways depending on your backgrounds and how you got brought up, and whether or not you're brought up in a agricultural society or a more urban environment. You have different outlooks on these topics. At the root of it is, it's how do we live a good life with the people around us? I find personally, like, that's at the root of a lot of things.
Yeah.
You know,
We want to do well for our communities, right? And so and there's different interpretations of what is doing well for your community.
hmm,
And I think that's where we have to start and figure out what people's threshold for that even is in the first place. But at the end of the day, for the most part, that is what people want. And so, yeah, I mean, there is two sides to every story or more, right? And so, I don't know, just being on the WRFI course, I think the Tintina mine was really our big one for us, where, we went and talked to MEIC, Montana Environmental, I think, Information Center, and their staff attorney spoke to us about the mine and their goals against the mine. And then we went and visited the proposed mine site at the time. And everyone was so nice. Everyone was so nice. And the folks at the mine were like, well, we just want to provide jobs. This is White Sulphur Springs. There's not a lot of work. True. I mean, I live in a small town where there's not a lot of work. And it's going to be really hard because it's not cheap to live in our state. And then the folks at MEIC also made really good points. Well, if this were to happen, this is the possible result. And of course, you don't want to see our environment undergo catastrophic effects. And also, you don't want to see fish die and all that. And so, it was really, really tough on us, but it was important. I was so glad that we went.
That's incredible. Did you get to experience any Indigenous perspectives on your course in 2017? I know that's something we really still focus on now, but I'm curious what your experience was like with that, especially coming from the East Coast. I think how Western society deals with Indigenous perspectives, in my opinion, differs pretty extreme from the East Coast to out here in the West.
Yeah, we did. We did a little bit of work. When I say work, course studies and so forth, up on the Blackfoot Reservation, or the Blackfeet Reservation, excuse me, at the beginning of our course, but that was very limited. And I wouldn't say that we really did a lot of work with any actual Indigenous members of the tribe at the time, but we did some studying of, the history and so forth. And then the predominant memory that I have was we went down to Lame Deer, and we spent time with members of the Northern Cheyenne, and they were really gracious with us. And we actually got to do a sweat with them, which was great. And I've never been warmer in my life. It was an absolute mental challenge. It was incredible. I even remember it to this day. I was like, wow, that was just the most incredible thing I've ever done, honestly. We had a wonderful time. We were invited into a lot of different people's homes. We were there for a few days. One of our course members was given a dog, and she still has that dog. Danielle still has Yodi.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, isn't that cool? So she brought home a dog and took the dog back to Michigan. She's like a little heeler mix. She's so cute. We called her Meatball for a week. No, I mean, we did have that interaction. I would be really curious to see what WRFI is doing today, because I think it was just starting to come on board when we attended. But we did a lot of work understanding kind of like the cultural difficulties of being on the reservation right now, and then also talked a lot about Indigenous knowledge and environmental knowledge of the area and so forth. It was great.
That's amazing. Yeah, I do think, and we can get to this a little bit with when you were serving on the board, but I've come in, and it's one of the things we focus on now, especially this year with our new team, looking forward to WRFI in the future, is how can we strengthen that interaction and that relationship we have with the tribes of Montana, but then also the tribes of the American West as a whole, because we do think we're glad that we've done it in the past, but we think we could be doing a better job at it, and we think we could be doing it more and put more of a focus on it from how we even approach doing these sort of courses.
Right.
I think it's very important. I spoke with some alumni yesterday, and one of them, Sam, he is Indigenous, and he said that he really respected, he did Conservation Across Boundaries in 2021, and he was like, my experience in Western higher education had been basically ignoring my past and the Indigenous perspective on the American West. And I don't say this to just toot Murphy's horn too much, because I do think we can be doing better and we're striving to do better. But he said, like, it was the first time he's been in a community that really put that front and center and how we talk about conservation. And I think as, you know, I think Murphy, we're still full-time staff. We're 100% white Western society. We can use our power to put those voices at the center of this conversation and conservation.
I think so. In college, when I went to MSU, we really did not cover any Indigenous topics. The first time that I did cover it was predominantly on my Worthy course. We would talk about it to an extent because I was in environmental studies courses, and so I kind of got to choose the courses that I took, and some of them did cover such topics, but overall, not very much. And I will say, like, growing up in New Jersey, obviously there is an Indigenous presence in New Jersey. And we're taught a little bit of it. When I say a little bit, I think I was in first grade and was talking very rudimentarily about, and all of it was probably wrong. Let's be honest. Had a lens on it for sure. But I really appreciated that Worthy brought in that component, especially for me, because I don't think people realize this, but a really large component of law in the United States, and particularly in water law, has to do also with Indian law, Indigenous law. And so I took a lot of courses in law school that would cover what are called Indian law topics. And so I just really appreciated getting the context that I did on the Worthy course to set me up for law school, because those types of cases tend to be some of the more complex cases that we've seen in the United States, simply because Indigenous nations do have sovereignty, they do have their own jurisdiction, and they do have their own cultural components that dovetail into what has become Indian law case law in the United States. There is some deference that's given to that. And so, it was really interesting, and I was really thankful for it.
Amazing. You mentioned earlier that you love fall in Montana, and I do think that it is the most underrated time to come to the state. It's amazing. It's the best. Larches are changing. You can get some random freak snowstorms and 4 seasons in a day. Not to just ask about the weather, but how was that experience, being out in your tent, living outside for this very beautiful but sometimes temperamental part of the state's climate?
So in 2017, that was the year that Montana had over 1 million acres burned. It was I think Montana's largest wildfire year ever, but I do remember over 1 million acres burned because it was a really large topic. A lot of eastern Montana was on fire. A lot of western Montana obviously was also on fire. But eastern Montana was experiencing really large scale fires, like 100,000 plus acre burns of grasslands and so forth. Our trip for the first half was incredible weather, perfect fall Montana weather, which is no humidity, sunny, 75, not a breeze, aspens are changing, cottonwoods are changing into just like a beautiful, golden yellow. It was incredible. And I remember on our course, because it was a very large shift, we were out on the Missouri River Breaks. It's a 10-day course, or a 10-day trip, I should say, going down the river. And when you get onto the Missouri River Breaks, you cannot leave except for on day 5 or so, because there's a bridge that crosses the river that could potentially take you to some type of town. Otherwise, you are in the middle of the National Monument and you cannot get out. We had passed that bridge. And I remember our instructor, Mel, said, "There's a storm coming tonight. I can see it on our sat phone." She would check the weather via the sat phone. It's a little different at times, right? In the last 10 years, things have really changed. And she said, "Oh, a big weather shift's going to come. It's going to drop about 50 degrees. And we were like, "Oh." And it did. So overnight, pretty much in the next day, we went from lounging, basically tubing down the Missouri, to full on like 30 mile per hour headwind, constant. It took a full day to get to our campsite. It was snowing on us, and we didn't even do class that day because it was so awful. And I remember that was a very interesting time. It was a challenge for sure. We were maturing, I guess you could say. And then from there, I mean, it was typical Montana weather where you'd get a little bit of snow here and then it'd be nice again and snow. But I think that was all part of it. I think that was really important. I remember we were up in the mountains at one point, it snowed really hard on us, and we were on our solos, and that was kind of difficult for us.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us out in the night with no tent, and it turned out it snowed, and that was also a challenge. And we should have known better because the cowboy we ran into the day before said, "It's going to snow. Get out of here." And we're like, "Hey, you're fine. No big deal." It was not fine. But no, I think that was the most important component, was just learning to be around the weather, interact with the weather, since we're so unused to that anymore. You know,
Yeah.
if it's ugly out, you just leave the house, right? And also be learning and be students at the same time. I mean, you're sitting in your tent while it's snowing, maybe writing out an assignment. You're not doing it on your computer, you're writing it out by hand, or you're reading and taking notes as part of your assignment. So it's very analog. And I think that was really important to learn how to do that while also facing the elements. It was huge. It was a huge component.
What do you think is the main difference as someone who's gone through both a WRFI course and an intensive Knowles course? You know, when you look at those two experiences that you had, what sets them apart in your head?
Yeah. So Knowles is really centered on learning how to exist in the outdoors, how to survive. And then also, you know, there's a leadership component, sure. You know, the best way to navigate yourself and maybe who else you're with through the outdoor space so that you're safe, taken care of, and so forth, you know? WRFI does that, but adds an additional layer of academia. And so, you know, you might be getting these leadership courses that you would maybe get on a Knowles course. It's less formal because it's just kind of naturally coming through as you're interacting with the space. Say like you're out on a backpacking stint. So in Montana Foot and Afloat, it's backpacking, kayaking. That's how it's set up. And so you might be out backpacking on a 10-day stint, and while you're moving campsites and you're backpacking for the day, you might have that leadership component, the more outdoor, you know, centered component of, this is the best way to set up your pack. This is how you should put your socks on so you don't get blisters, you know, things. This is when you should maybe eat, all that stuff, which sounds simple, but some people do need that, right?
Sure.
I mean, it is foreign. And then you get back and you have class. You get to your campsite and you have class. And then from there, you have assignments. And so you will go back to your tent. It's not just sitting idle. I mean, on a Knowles course, there's a lot of sitting idle. When you're not moving, you're cooking probably. You're making up different things that you can make and cooking and trying to find things to do. And that's not the case on a WRFI course. You kind of eat and then you go and do your coursework and then you go to bed. So I would say it's much more robust in that context than a Knowles course.
I think to this day, the number one thing we hear from students after their course is, "Oh, that was a lot harder work than I thought it would be." You know, I think some people,
I don't think people realize this. Like, you have essays to write and you bring your notebook. So when you start a WRFI course, you're told bring a notebook and all this. And it's kind of like your, I don't know, epicenter for your learning. It's this notebook that you have. I remember I still have it. I actually, because I'm moving houses, just picked my moleskin up from my WRFI course yesterday. And I know it has all the stickers on it and all my drawings and all that. And it's just, I love that book. But I had a big moleskin hard-sided notebook, and you do everything in that book. You write your notes, you write your essays, you do all of your assignments, and then you provide that notebook to your instructor and they grade you out of that notebook. And so it's a very interesting process. It's unlike anything else. And I don't think people realize that there is truly an academic component to it. You are going to school. But I think it's the best way to learn. I think Learning analog is wonderful. When I was in law school, does not allow you, it might have changed now, but when I went to law school, I was not allowed to take notes on a computer. Actually, weren't really allowed in our classroom, especially for your first year. You have to take notes by hand. And the reason why is because it's been proven that you are more likely to retain that knowledge if you write it. And I thought that was a really important component of the WRFI courses. It's inherent. You have to write by hand. There are no computers out in the field, but I still remember things from my WRFI course that I think I remember because I wrote them down.
Is there any particular academic lessons that you learned there that, specific class times, areas where you're learning it, that like that day of learning really stands out to you still of, oh, I'm so glad I had to go through that?
I wouldn't say that there was a particular day.
Yeah.
Only because it's been so long now that I don't necessarily remember the lessons in whole, but I do have quick memories of different locations of where we've held class before. And those really stick out to me. And I think that's just the type of memory I have too. Like I get little visions of places and spaces that I've been, but I really enjoyed all the courses that we did about land use and so forth, because I wanted to be a lawyer and because I've just always been intrigued by the mosaic that kind of runs the Western United States in regards to the use of public lands, management of wildlife, management of recreation and so forth. And so those courses to me were extremely helpful just to get an idea of how this all works, because it is very difficult. I mean, we have the Forest Service, we have the BLM, we have state agencies, we have the Fish and Wildlife Service. I mean, the list goes on. And so for me, that was incredibly helpful. I really enjoyed that component. And then I also really enjoyed, we did a little bit of environmental history work, and I took an environmental history course in college, which was probably one of my favorite courses I've taken in college, just thinking about the history of a space and how the way that the space is laid out, such as geologically and so forth, how that would influence how people interacted and with that space. There's a river here and the tree stand was here and so forth, and how that actually led to people developing the world in the way that they did. There was kind of a component of that too in some of our lessons, and I really enjoyed that. And then all the creative writing, environmental creative writing components, I just really enjoyed just to have that ability to read those essays and so forth. Really.
Oh, incredible. So you go through this was it 70 days in 2017, or is that what we do now?
Well, it probably was 70 days. It was a long time. I think it was.
Yeah. You spend these, 2.5 months out in the wilderness. How was readjusting to being back in Bozeman after you get back from this grand expedition?
It was really strange. It was really strange. You go from spending all of your time with these people to then just being abruptly ripped away from them, more or less, and especially on my course, I feel like some courses may have students that are more so from the same university than maybe my course was or have in the past, but there really wasn't very many of us from MSU. So, and it's also a weird time because you finish your WRFI course prior to your university, typically your university's semester ending. And so I was done with school for the semester and my roommates were not, and I moved back into the house. And so that was a bit strange, but I came off the course and, I was tired and ready to be back in a bed for the first time. But I really did struggle to disengage, and I actually ended up doing a lot with my course mates. So I remember Gavin and I actually drove back to the East Coast together, and then I went up to Vermont and saw some of our course mates too, because I wanted to see them. And so it was a tough adjustment, but it had to happen, right? Yeah. The course had to. We couldn't all live together forever.
Yeah. Only some people can continue to live out in the wilderness forever. And,
I mentioned to everyone, I'm pretty sure I was like, we probably should just lived together. All of us. Yeah. I remember my group too was really into Holes, the movie Holes. And
Great
so we
movie.
came up with such a good movie. And so we had like nicknames for each other that were very strange, like we were in Holes, And so, yeah, we were just a really tight group, and I was super thankful for them.
What was your nickname?
I can't remember at all. I don't even know. I'll have to look. Maybe, I think it was like, oh, I have to look. I cannot remember for the life of me. I remember some people had different names though, and yeah, it was funny.
I love that.
Yeah, I don't know why I can't remember mine, but we did have names for each other. So,
Are you still in contact with any folks from your course?
I reach out to them every once in a while. It's been, as years have gone on, less so. I think as we've gotten older too, but I do have everyone's numbers and I do reach out. A lot of people moved out west actually on my course that were East Coasters, and so there's a few of us in Montana now, which is super nice. So there are opportunities for us to get together. And I remember a few folks came to the WRFI reunion a few years ago. We had a big reunion for WRFI, and a few folks came to that. But we do stay in touch to an extent. Probably should do better so, but I think too with the impacts of COVID, the ability for people to stay in touch with each other kind of went out the window. I think people do less so now. But we chat every once in a while.
Was your number one pick for law school? Did you know I'm gonna go become a Grizzly after being a Bobcat for so long?
I suppose it was my number one simply because it was my only to to go to law school. Again, as I've said, I've been very strong in my path forward, and I have had a plan for a long time. And I think it just goes back now to the concept of me wanting to be in Montana and loving Montana so much that I had no reason to leave. I was like, I'm gonna go to law school in Montana. I'm going to practice law in Montana. Why wouldn't I go to law school in Montana if I'm going to practice here? And so I graduated from MSU a year early, and then I spent my year off in the Ruby Valley working kind of in nonprofit work, environmental nonprofit work. And then also I was a server at a local restaurant. And then I used that time to get prepared to go to law school and apply because I just didn't have time in undergrad. But yes, I knew I was going, and everyone complained. They are all like, oh, you're going to become a Grizzly now. But what I like to say is I never lose, right? I never lose.
Sure. I was going to ask, when that happens, do you root?
Yeah, it's always a good day.
I love that. Congrats on the national championship, by the way. We were all sad over here in Missoula, but glad I got it brought back to the state,
My husband's little sister actually was a cheerleader for the Cats the last 4 years. So, and my husband is from Butte. And Butte people, for the most part, I shouldn't say this. No, I'm not going to say this. I would say, oh, they're mostly Bobcat fans. It's not true. That's a big lie. It's split. But Tommy Malott playing for the Bobcats, I think, made a lot of people in Butte more so Bobcat fans than before. But yeah, after 3 times in the last 4 years going to the national championship, having the Bobcats finally win was great. It was necessary.
There were a lot of the friend group that I got brought into. I first moved to Columbia Falls in the Flathead Valley, which I would say there's a good mix of Grizz and Cats fans, but it's about 65-35 maybe Grizz. And my specific friend group was diehard Grizz fans, and they got me into the rivalry. And even all of them, the diehard Grizz fans, were all rooting for the Cats in the national championship because you got to root for the state, you got to root for Montana bringing it home.
It is funny though, because I am in Bobcat country again after leaving Missoula, because a lot of people, typically the way that it falls too is if you are in farming and agriculture, you're probably going to be a Bobcat fan because MSU is the land grant university, and so they have all the agricultural degrees. And so, yes, very much in Bobcat country here.
When you were going to did you have an idea of you would end up back in the Ruby Valley? Is that where you wanted to practice? How did that go once you were now in Missoula? You were studying, you got to this point, you're now in law school, you're studying. was it specifically water law at UM, or how does that program work there?
So when I went off to law school, I wanted to focus on water law predominantly, but I also wanted to get into natural resources law, property law, all of that, basically land use law, and then all the components that kind of dovetail into it. I have always wanted to come back to the Ruby Valley, but it wasn't necessarily my end all be all goal. Although I am a person that tends to make a decision and it usually ends up happening. And so I really would wanted for a long time to end up here. My parents manage a small ranch in the Upper Ruby. And so I like to be near my family. And I love being in the Upper Ruby in particular. It's just a really beautiful place. There is a WRFI course that runs through there. Which one is it?
Is it restoration ecology?
It's restoration ecology. And
yeah.
I think it goes through there. It's Upper Ruby is a very small little river valley that has the Snowcrest, Gravelly, Greenhorn Mountain ranges surrounding it. And I just love it up there. And my husband is a big outdoorsman too. He's really into fly fishing and hunting. Like hunting is a really big part of our lives in the fall, to really get lean protein for our family. And that's where we get a lot of our meat. And so we spend a lot of time down here anyways. And we were when I was in law school and then thereafter. And so I always wanted to be a lawyer because I enjoyed the water component, but I also knew too, you can be a lawyer pretty much anywhere. That's the benefit of being a lawyer.
Sure.
And so a few years ago, was asked by some family friends if we wanted to move into their house. And I was working as a water master at the Montana Water Court at the time. And we decided to move down here. And it's been wonderful ever since. I mean, I just love being in a small town. That to me, I hate traffic. I don't like driving on the road. I'm kind of a curmudgeon in that way. And so for me, it's perfect. We don't have a traffic light. It's great. And there's no traffic whatsoever and beautiful views. I know a lot of people in town. I'm close to my family. We're close to my husband's family in Butte because it's only, it's about 40 minutes to my parents and 40 minutes to my husband's family. And so, yeah, that was a goal for a while. But it wasn't the end all be all. I wanted to be in Montana. I was hoping to get out of the larger town. I will say the type of person I am, I did find Missoula to be a little bit overwhelming and Bozeman becoming overwhelming for me. I think it's because I never lived in a town any bigger than Missoula. It's just crazy to say that I had to move to Montana to move to a city, but that was the largest town I've ever lived in. And so I was feeling the weight of, I don't know, the amount of people kind of weighing on me for sure.
100%. No, I get that. I think I've lived in a couple bigger cities than I am in Missoula, and Missoula is about as big of a city as I can handle now. And
yeah,
I like it, but there's something about that small town feel. I grew up in a pretty small town in Colorado, and that's the thing I really loved about Montana is even our big cities aren't that big by other standards. And
no, I mean, I think it's 80,000 people in Missoula.
Yeah, just about. I think we just cracked 80,000.
Yeah.
So you had to explain to me the first time we talked about water court and what a water master means. Would you mind getting into that a little bit? How do you transition from studying that law to where you are now with, you have your own, is it a private firm now that you're running, Reynolds Law?
Yeah, so I have my own private practice. I'm a solo practitioner where I am the lawyer, the secretary, the paralegal all in one. But I became, before I started my own private practice, I was a water master at the Montana Water Court. And that is a term of art, the word water master. So in the legal system, there is a type of quasi-judge, I would like to say, and somebody's going to refute me and say I'm saying this incorrectly, and that's fine. That acts as they're a quasi-judge, and they make recommendations to the person that is the full judge. It happens, a standing master occurs in a lot of jurisdictions where the courts are over burdened, and they may not be able to get funding for a full judge, but they can get funding for a standing master. And so what standing masters do is they handle their own caseloads, and then they basically handle the case up until the very end. They make recommendations on how the case should be resolved, or maybe even handle it to trial to an extent. And then they make those recommendations to the judge, and then the judge will approve them. So in Montana, we have our own court for water rights issues, specifically in the context of what's called the Montana Water Rights Adjudication. Back in 1973, Montana passed a law, it's called the Montana Water Use Act, that initiated the adjudication process. And the purpose of the adjudication is to get historical water rights that existed prior to that 1973 date on paper. Previously in Montana, you did not necessarily have to get a piece of paper to represent your water right. You could just have a water right, say you have a water right, use it, and all is well. Then things started to change, and the Montana legislature realized, well, we probably should get water rights on paper. So they passed that statute, that act, Water Use Act, and initiated the adjudication process, and the water court's in charge of that. So around 250,000 water rights were filed on for the adjudication process. People filled out a form evidencing water right. And then it's the water court's job to more or less edit those water rights through case proceedings, since they're a property right. And people have the opportunity to get involved. People can file objections to, say, someone else's water rights, or they can object to their own with the purpose of making corrections and clarifications to those water rights. And that's the process I was a part of. So I was a water master, one of about 10 at the Montana Water Court, where there's 2 water judges. And my role was to oversee cases and make recommendations to the water judge. And I did that for a few years. I knew I wanted to work at the water court in law school. It's a very natural transition for a person that wants to practice water law to work at the water court. And so I interned for the water court in law school, and then I came back after law school. And then I did that for a few years, and I was living here in the Ruby Valley and wanted to be more involved with the community, to be honest, instead of working remotely. And so I decided to, as they say, hang my own shingle last year. That's what I've been doing ever since.
Oh, well, congrats for making that big step. What has been the biggest difference between working as a water master versus running your own firm and being a kind of a one-man band for all of that?
Yeah, I would say the biggest change has been more on the legal side. When you're a water master, you are the bench. You are the person that's getting to decide when things are due. You decide deadlines. You make decisions. Everyone is waiting on you. When you're a water master, you don't ask permission for things. You set the deadlines. You set the course of the case and so forth. As the attorney, my job now is to comply with those deadlines. And so that has been a bigger transition, simply because I have to be at my office a lot more frequently. I have to be much more apprised of what's going on with my cases, simply because I can't let them sit, because if I do, I risk missing a deadline or something, whereas that's not the case at the water court. You know, you could leave for a week and it's not a big deal when you're a water master, since you're setting the deadlines. But also a big transition has just been interacting with clients and interacting with actual water users, which was a really large goal of mine in leaving. I wanted to interact with the water users more. When you're a water master, a lot of it's very clerical on paper. I guess it would have been like clinical in a way. You're given evidence on paper. You make a ruling based off of that evidence on paper. You don't actually get to see the people that are connected with these properties and these water rights and so forth. And I really wanted to provide assistance to people, particularly farming and ranching folks, to help them with a topic and an issue that's very difficult. So that has been really rewarding to help folks, because water is very complicated, and you're either I find in Montana, you're either fully in on water law as an attorney or not. And so there's not a ton of us that practice water law pretty much exclusively. So I feel very lucky that I can provide people with the assurance and the assistance that they need. A lot of people need assurance too, because they don't know what's fully going on, and they shouldn't have to, right? There's too much to know. And so I just feel very thankful that I can provide that for them.
Is your client base really local? Like, how far does your client reach go throughout the
Yeah.
state?
So I represent people all over the state of Montana. It's not just the Ruby Valley. I do represent a lot of folks around here, of course. But I have clients out in Big Timber. I've got folks up near Big Sandy. We're all over the place. I think the water port does operate online for the most part. So, and it's located in Bozeman. So for that component, it's really nice. But no, I'm not necessarily just a local attorney. I'll represent anyone in the state of Montana, which is very rewarding too. I think and I sometimes have the ability to go out to people's ranches, and I do love that too. It's really fun to go on a field trip.
That's incredible. What do you think is like, the most important thing if you're not getting into water law? I think a lot of people who might listen to this don't understand the complexities of what that takes, the whole world, the problems that ranchers are facing when it comes to water rights in Montana, but as a country. Like, what is like the one message you would want the general audience to know, to worry about the world of water use and water rights, water law? If you had one message to scream at the top of a mountaintop for everyone to hear when it comes to the world of water, what do you think it would be?
I think a lot of people mischaracterize having water rights as taking water out of the stream to the detriment of wildlife, particularly fish, which isn't necessarily wrong. However, if we don't protect water rights in the Western United States, that means more farms and ranches can't operate. And when you have an unsuccessful farm or ranch, normally what ends up happening is that farm or ranch is subdivided and turned into some other use, the land. And we cannot get those lands back. The more we get rid of farming and ranching land, we're just going down this downward slope of losing open grasslands and so forth that provide open space for wildlife and so forth, and just general enjoyment by people. I mean, I like looking at space. I think a lot of people do versus a subdivision. But what tends to happen after farming and ranching goes away out of space is the next best use of that space is selling it for homes. And so I think people don't realize that it's all tied together. I too want to make sure that our wetland or I guess our rivers and streams are maintained to the extent that they can still sustain wildlife. However, at the same time, I do see it on the same side that if we continue to get rid of water rights or infringe on water rights, it's a slippery slope of losing farming and ranching land. And so I think a lot of people don't realize the nuance in all of it. It's all tied together.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of people don't realize that there are a ton of farmers and ranchers that voluntarily cut their water rights to maintain water in a stream, particularly in Montana. Not every stream, but a lot do, because they do care. They don't want to see fish just die for the sake of them dying. A lot of them think much more worldly than that. But it's a very difficult topic. There's a lot of balancing that goes on with water rights.
It's not black and white.
It's not black and white. Never is, Matt.
Never is. How did you get back involved with WRFI post-graduation? How did you go from being just a WRFI alum to a former WRFI board member?
Mm-hmm. So I was in Missoula. I was attending law school, and I think Joe, who was working at WRFI at the time and was my previous instructor, reached out to me looking to get in touch and see how I was doing. I think WRFI was going through a little bit of a downturn simply because it was the pandemic. I went to law school height of COVID online pretty much for the whole time. And when you are going through a global pandemic, it's very hard to run group courses. And so it was, I believe, late 2021, maybe early 2022, right before I was about to graduate, that WRFI reached out and said that they were going to be doing some different things coming up to try to revitalize WRFI in general and start up courses again, because that had not been happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took Joe up on an offer to catch up, and I met Matt, who just started as the executive director, I think that year, and spoke to Matt for a bit and said, I really do. I just love WRFI so much. I thought it was the greatest experience. And so I told him that. And he mentioned that maybe I'd be a good fit for the board as an attorney or new attorney, and also an alumni. And I jumped at the opportunity. Of course, I want to get involved and help in any way I can.
Matt has that way to kind of get you to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit deeper, don't you?
Yeah.
I was working up in Glacier Park for a nonprofit up in the Flathead Valley, and I had one phone call with Matt that was 30 minutes, supposed to be 30 minutes, and we talked for, I think, just under an hour. And I was like, I need to move to Missoula and be part of this community, because he for those of y'all maybe listening who don't know, Matt Baker White is our current executive director and is probably the most enthusiastic person I have ever met. Just energy-wise, and the way he talks about WRFI is infectious.
And he's he really loves WRFI. He really loves WRFI.
What was your term as a board member like for you? How was the experience? Was that new for you, serving on a board of an organization?
Yeah, it was very new. I mean, I loved it. I will say I didn't have the opportunity to get incredibly involved, other than I did really help with putting on I think it was the 30th anniversary party. That was kind of my big thing, but I ended up leaving prematurely simply because I moved down here to the Ruby Valley. It was just too hard to get back to Missoula constantly. It's 3.5 hours or so. And so I decided to put my time elsewhere. I now am on the board of the local animal shelter here.
Oh, incredible.
But yeah, it's a problem sometimes though, because I love dogs, Haven't walked home with one yet, thank goodness. But my husband would be happy with another dog, but because I have a little bit of a dog addiction, but that's okay. So I didn't get the opportunity to do a lot, but I did really get involved with the 30th anniversary, and Gail and I pretty much put that on together. Gail Dutchy, she works for WRFI as well, if anyone's listening. And that was a really great success. And it was just amazing to have so many people come to Missoula for that event for the whole weekend and enjoy that and see all these faces of people that have attended a WRFI course over the 30 years. It was really amazing. Also really amazing just to see the community of people in Missoula who are WRFI alums too. I would say that was the most meaningful component of my time on the board, is just getting everyone that's experienced a WRFI course back together. It was really fun.
Well, I thank you for your work on that, because I do think it's the reason why my position and our development director are now parts of the WRFI team, because I think Matt saw the yeah.
It was hard. It was hard to it was as a volunteer, I think anyone experiences this. You have limitations on how much you can do volunteering on top of your full-time position, right? And so it was a lot of work, but it was worth it. And I hope, with your new position, that more things like that come to fruition. It was great.
And they will be. When I started, this is why this project started, was to really, really further the reach of that community and make sure we're all still keeping up on top of each other and talking to each other and having more events where we're all coming together and we're interacting. And I think Matt saw the success of the 30th anniversary and was like, all right, I need people who are working for me full time doing this.
Yeah.
Oh, were you a part of our strategic planning session? Was that when you were on the board?
I was on the board for a little bit of that, and I did attend some of those sessions. I don't remember fully if the strategic plan was fully approved at the time that I left, but I was a little bit involved in all of that.
I love that. All right. Well, I want to respect your time, so we're coming up on the end of it. This has been wonderful. I have one final question that I've asked all the alumni I've done this with so far. If say a student who is considering a WRFI course is listening to this and they're maybe on the fence about, is this right for me? Can I go live in the wilderness for 70 days? Am I, set up for something as intense as this? What would be your message for that student who is maybe, oh, I don't know. Should I do this WRFI course?
So my answer would be yes, you should do it. It's going to change your life, but expect to be uncomfortable for the first bit, especially now in today's world. When I did my WRFI course, it was 2017. Yes, of course we had cell phones. Yes, of course we had social media and the internet, but I would say it wasn't nearly as pervasive as it is now. And so expect to be uncomfortable with being outside of that world for a bit. But once you do get outside of it, you're going to love it. And it really changes your perspective on the world. It really lets you slow down. It lets your mind ease. You get away from your phones. You get to learn in a way that really people were learning in an analog context for centuries. And it's going to really take you back to, your foundational roots as a human being. It's worth it. It really is.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brooke. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it.
I hope I answered questions well. If you have other questions, just let me know and we can always hop back on or something at some point. I don't know if we answered everything that you needed then, but.
Oh, you did. This has been wonderful. And I know we had mentioned this the first time we talked. I would still love at some point to do another episode with you, but really getting into the complex world that is water in Montana, because
Yeah, that's where I can nerd out.
yeah.
I can nerd out, so that sounds fun. But yeah, no, of course, I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wild Rockies Field Institute podcast. The Wild Rockies Field Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit based in Missoula, Montana that offers academically rigorous field programs for college students and high school students who want to study out in the American West. You can learn more about WRFI, the work we do, and join us out in the field by going to WRFI.net. That is WRFI.net. Thank you so much for listening, and from all of us here in Missoula, we'll see you next month.